This week, we traveled to Texas to the amazing, overwhelming South by Southwest show.
We're going to talk about tech, politics, and a little barbecue.
Then IEEE reports on a new drone delivery service that could drop into a neighborhood near you.
Sounds scary. This is Future Forward. I'm Gene DeRose.
I'm Steve Rosenbaum. Let us launch. All right.
So Steve, first some little news before we get going. We're now on Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. So folks out there, we need your help. If you like us, log in, vote, subscribe, share, get on social media. You know the drill. Give us a little bit of that love. It really helps a lot.
And of course, a big shout out to our friends at IEEE Spectrum. IEEE Spectrum is the world's largest engineering organization, and Spectrum is the flagship magazine. They are our partners and sponsors and friends, and we've got a great story from them this week. But we start with South by. Where should we begin?
Well, let's frame it. You were there, and you had a panel, and you are always good at wandering around and seeing what's going on. So we have to hear about your panel, but you can save that if you want. What's the buzz? What's the main feeling?
So I've been here 3 days. I'll be here 5. It's changed for me a little bit as I've been here. It started there is definitely an anti-tech vibe. There's a tech utopian, dystopian conversation going on, and a bunch of people, have made some pretty big statements. Jonah Peretti kind of came out and said, the web is broken and we have to fix it, which I think is ironic given the source. But, and then also kind of looming over the conversation is the Mark Zuckerberg, we're going to reorient Facebook to be about privacy, which has everybody scratching their head. So definitely the tech optimist, the techno optimist vibe is down a notch.
Right.
Politics, very hot here.
Yeah.
Very hot.
Well, from a distance, politics, Steve, is what we kind of heard about because of and we're going to talk about it, but because of the presidential candidates being there, and in a way, and the AOC types, and in a way, it's that perfect storm because new Democratic administration, Facebook, dumpster fire, the idea of calling for reforms and the for shame side of it. I don't know if people felt that, but it probably does mean that the lots of money being invested blue sky side was not as prevalent.
So before we get into tech and politics, which are the two big categories we're going to talk about, I'll just give you kind of some overarching Austin news for those of you who have been to South by in the past or are thinking of going. Every year there's like something that bubbles up that's like a phenomenon. And I will tell you that for me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the phenomenon that is head scratching is scooters.
Really?
Scooters everywhere.
In a physical sense.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's, it's interesting. Well, I'll just say this, having been there 3 or 4 times myself, I think one of the things that's unique about South by is the physical location in Austin, which is a very accessible middle big city for this kind of thing. As a result, installations and walking around and it's pretty cool and it's outdoors. And so I could just imagine if scooters were even a possibility, it must have been a little dangerous almost.
So everywhere you go, there are hundreds of scooters kind of scattered on the sidewalk.
Interesting.
I think I tweeted, it's a plague of scooters.
Like Amsterdam and bicycles kind of thing, or?
Yeah, but the thing is, unlike the bicycle sharing systems where you can park them and there's places for them, scooters just get dropped.
Well, no, I mean, if you've seen Amsterdam, which has been doing it for 25 plus years, at the station, there's piles of bicycles. There's no rhyme or reason. It's take it and leave it kind of thing. So if it's like that, I can imagine. But aren't these expensive where they would get stolen or something?
So they're electric scooters. So they're, quote, free to unlock, whatever that means, and then 15 cents a minute to ride them. I have not ridden one. and I don't think I'm going to. Um, I have, I'm going to start to sound like get off my lawn, but, you know, Austin is a drinking city.
Yep.
And so at 2 a.m, when there are kind of swarms of drunken scooter riders without helmets, it's pretty clear to me that's going to be bad.
And some legal implications. Was there one vendor of the scooters who just decided to make this available?
Oh, no. There's Uber's got one line. There's about 4 different vendors, all have literally brought. I mean, I'm guessing they each brought 1,000 scooters to Austin.
Random coincidence, or were they coordinated?
No, total random.
That's amazing.
And unclear to me whether they've done any deals with the city or with South by, or whether, I mean, they're all exhibiting. Anyway, long and short, so scooters are a thing. And the other thing is, in the past, particularly the last couple of years, there were some enormous brand activations.
Yeah.
I mean, really big FedEx and McDonald's and all kinds of big brands. This year, most stayed home.
Yeah, I wonder if the numbers didn't tell enough of a story. And for those that don't know, because there's a music and film part of South by, which actually preceded in some ways the tech side. In the last 5 or 7 years, you've increasingly seen it go a little mainstream. Bruce Springsteen shows up and does a keynote, Obama, others. And so you could see how the brands would follow and then, well, wait a minute, what are we here for?
Yeah, and activations are expensive. I'm going to say my gut, having talked to a couple people kind of off the record, is it's not as much a policy as just the world's a little upside down. And, and part of what makes South by complicated is it is both a tech conference and a film festival and then a music conference festival and also a political venue and also a party. So sometimes those things kind of bump up against each other a little bit.
Yeah, and some of it sometimes has to do with scheduling, because the way in which they pace it, some of the most interesting things in my history have been in the overlaps and the between parts, when the music people are just showing up and the other people are just leaving. Not needless to say, during the whole thing, music is available everywhere in addition to the alcohol. But that's it's really interesting. It has such value, and in the time of year too, I think a ton of people from the north, the east, everywhere else are, just so glad to be down here. I wonder how many people actually go from the Mobile World Congress to this. Probably less.
That would be an intense schlep. All right, so let me tell you about my panel. So the panel was Friday morning. It was I was a panelist. I was not the moderator. The moderator was Baratunde Thurston, who is fabulous and smart and funny and really drove a good conversation. The title was Imagining an Internet Without Ads. And there was a woman who's the design director for the New York Times, Tracy Lee, was on the panel. And then a fairly controversial, interesting guy, Ramsey Woodcock from University of Kentucky, who's got a very strong legal position, which is that advertising, which has been defended by the Supreme Court for being, at times, for being informational.
Right.
Has
and
shifted.
Let me just interject, because for those of you that aren't regular listeners or have just picked up, Ramsey was on our podcast giving a preview last week, so people should go check that one out.
Yeah, he was terrific. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the panel except to say it was sold out, 800 people in the room, and
But what I'm curious though, what the reaction, because when we did our podcast, the sort of kind of radical nature of Ramsey's premise, was that directly addressed, and did it have a response?
Yeah. So it was tricky. So Baratunde started by saying, we've moved from being we the people to we the product, and we're now the product, and that got the room a buzz. And then, during my initial presentation, I did this little audience interactive thing where I said, everyone in the room who has ever taken a picture and posted it on the internet, raise their hand. rhetorical question. Every hand goes up. And I said, so look around. We're all content creators. We're not getting paid for making that content. We're not in any way being treated as part of the creative process, but we're all making the content that, for example, Facebook is profiting from. And that seemed to connect. The Ramsey kind of advertising is not your friend and should be the victim of antitrust, for reasons I do not understand, gets some very negative feedback. Partly because there were a lot of people in the room that were in the advertising business. Although why you would go to that panel if you're in the ad business is beyond me. It may be
whatever.
Know your enemy.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a bit of a hard. I think it's a hard point he made. Look, the ads are bad and should go away is one thing intrinsically that overlaps into the antitrust thing. I think the antitrust part can be a little bit of a nut to uncrack when you hit it at impact. And so I wonder if that doesn't get a little sort of hard to sort of grok. But
yeah, I think that's right. Anyway, but let's move on. The panel was great. Thank you for asking. There'll be an audio recording of it somewhere, and a bunch of people on Twitter bashing us. It's all good.
Yeah, it's all.
So, what do you want to do first? Do you want to do South by Southwide Tech, or do you want to do politics?
Well, I mean, a little bit of both. I think we should address the politics head on, and I do want to come back at some point to you mentioned Jonah Peretti, and I kind of got an in-depth look at that, so I would like to look at that because I think it overlaps with this. But did you get to see any of the politicians? Were people talking about it? Because the headline news is very much break up Facebook kind of stuff.
Yeah, I didn't. You could literally go back to back to politics. I went to a couple. I have to say, AOC was electrifying.
Yeah.
And in a way that I had never expected it to be. First of all, the press scrum at the front of the stage was far and away the most aggressive of anything I went to. There were 5x or 6x the number of photographers and cameras and media at hers than is at anything else. But the other thing that I found fascinating about her, and I'm still processing it a little bit, she was incredibly conversant.
Yep.
She wasn't reading from talking points. It didn't feel like a stump speech. She was interviewed by a woman from The Intercept who was really good. She was warm and likable, but her statements were powerfully controversial. And
yeah.
I'll give you just one example. She basically said she wanted to be done with the era of what she called MEH politics. And she kind of went like this, meh. And you could see that's going to be a meme immediately, like the minute she did it. And she talked a lot about kind of, moderate, people that call themselves moderates. And she essentially said, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
And she said, how can you be moderate about caging children at the border?
Yep.
Is the moderate position we should cage less of them, but only some cage children? What about breaking up families at the border? Should we be moderate and say, let's only break up less families? She said, what about climate change? Should we say we should try and solve climate change, but just not that, And she was forceful and charming and reasoned. And it just made me realize how much of a disservice I've done her in my brain by consuming her in sound bitey bites as opposed to letting her make her argument.
Well, look, here's what happened while you were there that I think represents a beginning of a shift, is that you're starting to hear her talked about the way Obama was talked about in 2003 and 4, which is to say, this person who is charismatic and beautiful and eloquent and, buzzy in a certain way has real eloquence and credibility and is someone to be reckoned with in a serious way. And it's really interesting because I think on the right, that whole thing of oh, he's a celebrity, is what they used to say in the 2006 to 8 period about Obama. She's past that. We talked. I said about 6 months ago that Kardashian, the youngest, I'm sorry, what's her name? The one, a billionaire, was the first truly internet era, self-made billionaire, like social media driven. I think AOC is the first completely homegrown digital and social media powered, engine. She has come out of that, and I think it's going to be a big deal the next few years.
Yeah, and by the way, it was a big room. It was their largest. It was the room that they put their biggest headliners in. It was full and oversold, and on top of that, she just. The other thing, and then we'll move on to tech, because tech's got a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
She, unlike Obama, who, had that kind of preacher rhythm and,
yep.
Like she has none of that kind of swelling oratory, which was in some ways a nice shift.
Like, no, it's more, there's authenticity to it, I think.
Yeah, and conversant, very like. I just found myself thinking that if I were in her shoes, I would be trying to parse my words to not end up setting off the right-wing, attack machine, and she just didn't care. Like,
well, look, I know we got to move on, but
yeah.
But from a distance, I'll just also say, because you may not even have realized it was happening, that Howard Schultz was there, and apparently you could hear a pin drop, and all that showed up were hecklers. And in a way, look at the two of them in comparison. She's creating this notion of revolt from within the system, and he is falling flat in a way that feels so inauthentic. And maybe that's the sort of summary on it.
Yeah, and then you have to talk about we're going to break up Facebook and Google and
Well, yeah, that does get into the meat
Elizabeth Warren talk.
Yeah, I mean, was there anyone from Facebook there? Did we hear anything from them? Where are we with that? Some of this overlap.
They have a big activation. They have a big downtown house. We didn't hear anything. At least I didn't hear anything about that. But again, as anyone who knows anything, I mean, no matter where you are at South by, no matter where you're standing, there is somewhere else where something interesting is going on that you wish you were at. Like I've become kind of zen with I am where I am, and I'm listening to what I'm listening to, and it's all going to be.
Well, Steve, just one thing, because I believe that Zuckerberg made big news this week, partly because of the timing of South by Southwest and the expectation and the knowledge that all these progressives were going to be speaking there. And maybe we should dwell on it a lot more next week. But the concept that he said of Facebook is going to go private sharing, feels as much about this and about like a Snapchat kind of vision as it does almost sound like the final chapter in internal war against Instagram itself too. So I wonder if people were talking about that, because that made big news around Wednesday.
So they were. It came up a lot in the bar late at night. And I will tell you, at least among my little focus group of 12 or 15 people, everyone thinks it's bullshit.
It feels like, speaking of jumping the shark, that Zuckerberg is in the worst political animal state of just being reactive to everything.
Yeah. It did not. I mean, everyone was like, great. They're still going to have they won't share your data with outside the network, but within the network, they'll still sell you shit. So yeah, it seemed poorly conceived.
Yeah.
And a little desperate.
And naive.
All right. So moving on, we've done politics. Politics was good. There's lots of other people who were here, and there will be more news out of South by for sure. And there's a good article, an interview with Hugh Forrest, who's the programmer for South by, about how politics has made its way into South by, that we'll put up on the show notes.
Yes.
Very thoughtful and look, and they do work hard to be bipartisan. They really actually do. They've invited, but Austin is, a little blue dot in the middle of a red state.
That's right. That's right. Did the, was part of the negative energy the I hope we're not into a nuclear winter for web media and journalism and all that happening? I mean, is part of what's going on that was that a subject? We know that Jonah Peretti addressed some of that, but it's been austerity, layoffs, and a lot of other downsizing that we've talked about for months now. Did that have a place there?
No, I mean, there's just too much beer and barbecue for it to be that thoughtful, in terms of what people are chit-chatting about. But I will say, whatever that frothy, check out the new app. There's a cool new app at South by this year. A lot of stuff launched here. Let's remember, Twitter launched at South by.
That's right.
Foursquare launched at South by. It didn't have that. There seemed to be, I would say, it's an era of practicality.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Not innovating as much as. And by the way, in terms of other big buzzwords and important things on the tech side, a lot of discussion about AI.
Yep.
A lot of discussion about AI. Certainly some discussion about fake news and the relationship between technology and content. But no apps, at least none that made their way
into. One of the things that happened in the wake of Foursquare coming out in 10 or 11 through Austin and South by is that for many years people started to think for mobile, location-based, and to have a bleeding edge, actually borderline consumer audience, this is why we would launch things and make a big deal in Austin, because things could take off out of nowhere if you managed it right, And I always believed that's true. And this year it's scooters and drones and politics. It's really interesting that I think we're in a downsizing of the startup world, or a repositioning that has a little to do with it as well.
Look, I mean, part of it is, it is as simple as, at least for the time being, the amount of oxygen that Facebook and Google combined have taken out of the ecosystem is dramatic. I mean, I went to one panel about local news in which Craig Newmark was on the panel and Vivian Schiller was on the panel and Steve Waldman from Report for America. And what they talked about, and it was, I thought, eye-opening and smart, was what's referred to within the industry as the news donut, the donut hole, which is there's national news and there's hyper-local, like, lost cat in your neighborhood, but no one's covering state government or city council meetings or any of this stuff, which always counted on the larger ecosystem of the newspaper to fund it, because no advertiser goes, oh, put my ad on the city council meeting page.
Well, local newspapers as a force are almost completely gone at this point, and so there's no local journalists with high profiles anymore. So it is a little bit sad there, and local media that's digital has become totally transactional and search-based and commerce-based and everything else. So you're right. I mean, that swings back to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everything. And I'll say this about, because I wanted to mention that, Jonah Peretti published a paper that people should read because it's very, very, accessible. And Brian, our good friend, Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter, did an excellent interview with him. And he said that they're making inroads, and he wanted to lead a bunch of publishers in starting to say we should be making more money for delivering lots of stuff for you inside Facebook. He said in 3 years his revenues from Facebook have gone from $7 million to $90 million.
His revenues.
BuzzFeed's revenues.
And he doesn't think that's enough.
Well, he says that's amazing and powerful. But it's costly to him, and it's they're up to 400 million plus, and about 75% of their engagement is happening in Facebook. So it's a little off.
All right, so let's move on and talk about this drone story, because I want to make sure we have time to do it. So, IEEE has a fondness for robots.
Yeah.
And so I'm always tempted to talk about a robot story. And then I looked at this drone story and I thought to myself, okay, so I mean, you know a little bit about this space. It's a medical drone delivery. So let's talk about it.
Well, it's part of what's starting. There's a generational thing that's happening in health and healthcare overall, and drones and robots and AI are all part of this need for services and a perfect storm of where technology could possibly head and where specific human needs are. And in fact, ground zero for this is a place like Japan, where the aging population is out of control. But the question is, there's a lot of questions: privacy, health, everything about drones, whether you're delivering and dropping things.
So here's, I guess, what I didn't understand. I read the story twice. So this is a company called Zipline that has had great success in Rwanda, dropping medicine, using drones. They now have FAA approval to start a U.S. test. But I found myself thinking, Rwanda, I'm trying to remember now. Do you remember it was in Indianapolis where the test is? No, that's not right.
I can't remember. But talk about contrast places.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
North Carolina. North Carolina, are they really going to fly over in an airplane and drop a drone in North Carolina to get you emergency medicine?
No, there's a disconnect there. Look, there's a long history of dropping supplies, food, pamphlets, weapons, everything else into third world and war zones and places where there have been natural disasters and things like that. And so drones are obvious as a potential solution. I don't see how it translates to the rest. I think the article seemed to suggest a leap of faith from, forget about where the trials are going on in the US, for us to think about Amazon dropping packages, into our backyard or whatever. And so the question is, that's a big, wide set of areas and issues. And I think you're right. I don't know how that's going to get. If they're doing something now, it's going to be because it has yet to be regulated. But the clamps are going to come down pretty fast on this stuff.
Well, but this is the North Carolina test is with the FAA. So
yeah, I believe that. I'm just saying that I don't know that they've. I think it's in a vacuum, right? It's not the air traffic control level.
All right, so this is Evan Ackerman's story, and the good news is the story itself is detailed. Then there's a video of the company, and then there's a long interview with the CEO. And we'll put the link in the show notes. But it definitely felt to me, maybe it's because I'm in Austin and I'm thinking about change. But I mean, scooters. I've never seen a battery-powered scooter on the street in New York ever. And now in Austin, it's pretty clear that I guess I didn't realize
there are a few in New York.
But, yeah, I guess I didn't realize that it could actually change the nature of urban transportation. And so I put drones in that category too, which is like all things, the future seems far away, and then it's arrives.
And what's interesting about that is that's right at a time where, for the first time in a while, there seems to be serious talk in New York about clamping down more heavily and more free pedestrian zones and limiting auto traffic and things like that. So probably about every single bit of it can be swept into the Green New Deal, which is another thing we should tag tech-wise on a future episode.
All right, so I just want to say for our listeners, I am not going to ride on a scooter. I am not scooter enabled. I have not been trained on said scooter. I don't have a helmet, and so you're not going to get video of me scooting around Austin. You'll just have to wait for another trip.
Steve, one last reference to the IEEE article, because not to shill for our partners, but what's remarkable about the history of IEEE and where that comes from is they largely come from a background of more sort of mechanical, electrical, like hardware related engineering that merged with the software engineer world, and they've done a reasonable job. I found myself on that article and clicking off to the side to a lot of peripheral things that are, it's a really interesting time. And I think there's a lot to explore there. And I think they did a really good job at contextualizing that in that sense that helped educate me a little more.
We are out of time. Once again, shilling for our social media network. Please like us on iTunes or Spotify or Google Play or any,
subscribe, do reviews.
And we will be back again next week with another episode of Future Forward. Till
right.
then, party on.